The clock says 4, so we will begin. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Angela Schultz. I'm the Assistant Dean for Public Service here at Marquette Law School. Dean Kearney regrets that he can't be here with us today, but it really is my privilege to have the opportunity to welcome you to Marquette Law School on behalf of Dean Kearney and on behalf of everyone here. And I'm welcoming you to our annual Posner Exchange and Pro Bono Society Induction. The Pro Bono Society was established by the late Howard B. Eisenberg, who was Dean of the Law School until 2002. Over the years, the number of students who have come forward to be actively involved with pro bono work and working for greater access to justice has greatly grown. This year, we are welcoming 109 individuals into the Pro Bono Society, with some 3/4 of them, you, taking a study break and joining us here today. Thanks for being here. Of the 109 people, 16 of you are first-year students, 38 are second-year students, 54 are third years, and 1 is a professor. All of these individuals have provided at least 50 hours of pro bono work, and we define pro bono quite rigorously, and almost a third have contributed at least 120 hours. Thank you to all of you. Before we name the individuals, we have a tradition, now in its 9th year. As part of this ceremony, the Posner Pro Bono Exchange. Through this, we honor the memory of the late Gene Posner, a member of our class of 1936 who was a lawyer, entrepreneur, and philanthropist here in Milwaukee. We honor his memory because much of our work has been supported by a multi-year gift, the Gene and Ruth Posner Foundation. Today, we're joined by Gene and Ruth Posner's grandson, Josh Gimbel, a lawyer with Gimbel, Riley, Guerin, and Brown here in Milwaukee, and the leader of the Posner Foundation. Some of you have likely worked with Josh at one of our Marquette Volunteer Legal Clinics at the Milwaukee Justice Center, where Josh is a regular volunteer. Josh is going to say just a few words in remembrance of his grandfather. Josh?
Thank you, Angela, and great to see all of you here today. What a big number of honorees, so I'm really honored to be here to represent the Posner Foundation at this 9th Posner Pro Bono Exchange. My grandfather was, as Angela pointed out, a 1936 graduate of Marquette Law School. My father was a 1960 graduate of Marquette Law School, and my brother was a 1984 graduate of this school. I went to a school down the road, 90 miles or so. I was a 1987 graduate of the other law school in the state. But the other place you get the bar admission, so it was a good deal. Anyway, my grandfather put himself through college. He was a product of the Great Depression. He was the son of immigrant parents who came to Milwaukee to find a brighter future. He was, in every meaning of the word, a self-made man. He became a businessman, he was an entrepreneur, and he also became a philanthropist later in life. But first and foremost, he was a lawyer, and he was very proud to be a lawyer. In fact, he practiced law for over 60 years. And many times I would see him have a parade of people coming in and out of his office where he would provide legal services, and I know he wasn't charging them for that work because he had many other ventures involved, and he just felt like he needed to do that. In the words of the great Dean Kearney, who's absent, to be sure, he would have been so impressed with Marquette's continued commitment here to instill in law students the importance of doing pro bono work while in law school. I found sort of an apt quote from what we would refer to as notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which I thought was appropriate for today. Lawyers have a license to practice law, a monopoly on certain services, but for the privilege and status, lawyers have an obligation to provide legal services to those without the wherewithal to pay, to respond to needs outside themselves, to help repair tears in their communities. And that is what we certainly hope that all of you will do when you graduate from this fine institution. And I think that it's fair to say that those of you who provide this pro bono services while in law school know the importance of it, and you will carry on doing that long into your future careers. I'm very proud of all of you. I worked firsthand with some of you at the Justice Center, as Angela said, And I would like to thank Angela and Katie and the rest of your staff for all the great work that you do to promote the pro bono activities at this school. Finally, I'd like to thank Mike Goucher and our guest, Professor Sandovar, for being here today. And congratulations to all of you, and good luck in your exams.
Thank you, Josh. So now on to the Posner Pro Bono Exchange itself. Our guest this year, as we've already discussed, is Rebecca Sandifer. Professor Sandifer is a sociologist from the University of Chicago and is a member of the faculty at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She's a faculty fellow of the American Bar Foundation, where she leads a research program on access to justice. This past year, she won a MacArthur Genius Fellowship for her work promoting a new evidence-based approach to increasing access to justice for low-income communities. Her work focuses largely on how low-income Americans make their way or don't make their way to the civil justice system. So we might think about this question as, how do people find us in our pro bono clinics? And what about all the people who don't ever even find us in our pro bono clinics? There's so many questions that I think are raised in Professor Sandifer's work, and we are lucky to have her here now with us, with Mike Goucher, Distinguished Fellow in Law and Public Policy. Let's welcome to Milwaukee and to Marquette Law School, Professor Rebecca Sandifer.
Thank you very much, Angela. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations in advance on the honors that you're receiving today. A great tradition that begins, and we hope will continue for many years to come. Professor, great to have you with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Let's talk about why a sociologist ends up studying access to justice. What led you to that field?
So some of you, I'm sure, wanted to be lawyers from the moment you were born, but I'm doing what I'm doing by accident. So I went to graduate school to study inequality, and the kind of inequality I was going to study was in education. And I got involved in a big research project that was going to provide the data for my dissertation, and it had a number of faculty who were involved. And I'm sure this never happens with law professors, but sociology professors can have very large egos. And the project collapsed under the weight of their very large egos. And I was in my fourth year of graduate school with no data and no dissertation project and no job. And so the phone rang, and it was somebody I'd taken a class from, and he said, I have a job for a research assistant on a project studying lawyers. And I thought, perfect. Data, dissertation, job, problem solved. And so I wrote my dissertation on the careers of lawyers and how they changed between the 50s and the 90s, looking at the lawyers in the city of Chicago. And as part of doing that, I became really interested in the role that lawyers play in our society. And lawyers don't play exactly the same role in every society, but in our society, we have this big public justice system that if all of us who pay taxes have already paid for, and we've staffed it with clerks and judges, and we've written laws, and there are file folders, and there are courthouses, and it's all already there, and you've all already paid for it. But if you want to use it, it's become so complicated and inward-looking that you have to go to a private third party, a lawyer, and pay that person to use your own public justice system. And when you think about my original interest, which was in education, there's a public school in every community. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, just like courts, right? And anybody who lives in that community can put their kids in that public school. Imagine if we said, okay, you can put your kids in public school, but in order to do that, you need to hire a private educational consultant. And the private educational consultant needs to go to every class with your child, needs to meet with the counselors with your child. If the kid gets in trouble, they're going to go to the meeting with the principal. Then you're welcome to use our public schools that you've already paid for and staffed with teachers from your community. But otherwise, it's going to be a pretty rough time for you. And so that really big difference between the gatekeeping role that different professionals play for different kinds of public institutions like law and education got me very interested in how, if you have that kind of structure, how do ordinary people experience then the problems that structure rules?
Let's talk about that. How do they experience? Because many people have very similar issues, legal issues, justice problems, as you often refer to them. What kind of problems are we talking about, and how do they resolve these problems?
So about 2/3 of American adults will have at least one civil justice problem in any given year, 18 months. And so if you think about all the stuff that we've made laws about, it's not surprising that when most things in life go wrong, they invoke some kind of law. So anything that's governed by a contract, like employment, or something you buy or sell. any kind of employment activity, if it's not covered by contract, there's wage and hour law and other kinds of regulations and rights law around it. There are laws around housing. There are laws around insurance. There are laws around benefits. And so when things go wrong in those areas, you have a justice problem. Whether you should file a lawsuit about it is a completely independent question, but you have a justice problem. So we have maybe 100 million, 150 million such problems in the country every year. And they happen in core areas of life. So they're about your livelihood, or your ability to take care of your kids, or dependent adults, or your ability to have a house. And so in those situations, we tell the story about ourselves that we're an incredibly litigious country where people spill coffee and then they file these crazy lawsuits and it takes forever. But in fact, maybe 12% of the civil justice problems experienced by Americans become either court cases or make it to an administrative tribunal like a Social Security hearing. So then most of that activity is getting handled some other way. And the most common way that people handle their civil justice problems is on their own. So they sort of look at the situation, my landlord's not paying me overtime, what should I do? Should I go to him and say, hey, dude, pay me overtime? Well, but maybe that would be a bad idea because maybe he would fire me and hire someone else who wouldn't mind not being paid overtime, right? So they work out their own understanding of the solution. The most common place that people go to for help is actually their immediate social network. So they go to their friends or to their family members. And then for about 22% of problems, they go outside that immediate network to some other kind of third party for help. And those third parties, people are actually really, Americans are very creative. So they go to church and other religious organizations, they go to membership organizations like AARP, they go to community groups, they go to elected officials and constituency services, and occasionally, 7% of the time, they go to lawyers. So there's an enormous amount of civil justice activity happening in really important areas of life, but not a lot of it is coming into contact with the justice system.
So the conventional wisdom says people don't go to lawyers because lawyers cost money. People don't have money. They can't afford a lawyer. Is that it, or is there more to it?
Well, so that's what I thought when I got started with all this, because it seems rational, right? Part of being poor is not having any money, and part of buying services is having money to pay for them. But if you look at, there's a couple of issues here. So one is if you look at the legal services that lawyers actually produce, some of them are very expensive. So corporate legal services, very expensive. Contested divorces, that's not a corporate legal service, but that can be very expensive. It happens over a long period of time. You can rack up $50,000, $100,000 legal fees as you get out of a marriage that's very conflictual. But there are lots of other legal services that are actually quite inexpensive that even well-off Americans don't buy. So it's actually not that expensive to make a simple will, but most people don't have them. So then it may be about the money sometimes, but it obviously is also about something else. And so one way you can get at what the something else is I do surveys where I ask people about situations in their lives. Are you 2 or more months behind on your rent? Is your employer owe you overtime he's not paying? Did you buy something from Amazon and it never arrived, right? So these specific life situations, all of which turn out to be justiciable, that is, they are actionable under the civil law by somebody who's involved in that problem. And you say, okay, you've told me your employer's not paying you overtime, or you're 2 months behind on your rent, or whatever is happening. What kind of problem is that? Is that a legal problem? Is it a criminal problem? Is it a personal problem? Is it a moral problem? Is it bad luck? Is it God's will for you? The most common response that Americans will give about these problems is it's either bad luck or it's God's will for me. Now, if this is something that just happens to me because stuff just happens to people, or even more impactfully, if this is something that happens to me because it's supposed to be happening to me, it has been ordained to happen to me, calling up an attorney and filing a lawsuit are probably not the top of mind solutions that I would turn to. And so how people think about the problems that emerge in their lives that we've made these laws about because we think we should have some collective investment in them turns out to be the first and most important factor in what makes it to law and what doesn't.
What are the consequences, though, of people who decide, I can solve this myself, or I have family members who can help me solve this? What are the consequences of that?
So sometimes it goes fine. Because sometimes the situation is such that you can understand it, or the people around you have some experience with it, and they can give you really good advice. But when I'm giving a long version of this kind of talk, I often give an example of a woman who was telling a story in a focus group about a problem. And so her problem was that the partner who was the parent of her child had died, and he had paid into Social Security, and so you would want to connect to the Social Security death benefit for that surviving child. So she was trying to figure out how to connect to that benefit, but it wasn't common knowledge that he was the father of this child, so then you have to have another way of connecting. So the first thing she does is go to his family and say, can you help me out? And his family's not very responsive. So then she goes to her family and friends and they say, well, why don't you get a blood test to show paternity? And her answer is, well, I can't because the father of my child was cremated. Well, why don't you go to his parents? Well, I can't because the father of my child was adopted, so I don't know who his biological parents are. So she does all kinds of things and searches for all kinds of information to resolve that problem, but that's a situation where whenever I describe that to a poverty law attorney, they're like, these are the 3 things you do and this problem's done. So sometimes it goes very well, other times not so much.
Yeah, and the not so much can be, for some people, catastrophic.
Absolutely. She wasn't able to make enough money to do everything she needed to do for her child.
So help us understand the role of the attorney. You have people who feel like through bad luck or an act of God, something has happened to them. They may not even see the need for an attorney, and yet we have attorneys or soon-to-be attorneys in this room who feel like, I'm willing to help, I would like to help there. How do we connect the two?
So one thing that we've learned from looking at interventions that people use and can find and those that they can't is, I call it, you have to be gimmicky in this business, right? You have to be gimmicky in your business too. It's the 3 T's. So interventions that people connect with well are timely, by which I mean they show up when I realize I have a problem, which is why putting volunteer lawyers in the courthouse makes sense, because I realize I have a legal problem if I'm in the courthouse trying to do something with a piece of paper. So they're timely, they're targeted, they're about the specific problem that that person has. So we've created lots of interventions, by which we mean really well, which are gigantic packets of information. And so I can go to a community center and pick up a gigantic packet of information about housing law, but what would be really effective for me and what I would use would be something that's like, you're about to be evicted, or you just got this letter, or there's mold in your bathroom, right? Sort of what specific problem do I have? So timely, targeted to the problem I actually have, and then coming to me through some kind of trustworthy source. And so again, the court for some populations is a trustworthy source, and for others, frankly, it's not. So that's a place where you can cite some things. But there are lots of forms of outreach that are embedded in different kinds of community organizations, that are embedded in religious organizations, because those are places that people already go when they're in trouble, and they trust the people who are in those places to give them credible information. So when you can design strategies that have those qualities, you can connect people to the help that they need.
The need, though, described for us, based on your research, your writing, the need for legal services for the folks we've been talking about who experience these kinds of problems, these justice problems.
So in the world of trying to raise more money for legal aid, we have the story that there's a justice gap. And the justice gap is the 80% of the legal problems experienced, for example, by poor people, so people eligible for LSC-funded services, don't receive the services of a lawyer. Okay, that's not the justice gap. The justice gap is actually the subset of those problems that don't receive whatever service they need to be resolved lawfully. So sometimes I, with the other side, can work it out myself. Sometimes I, with a mediator, we can work it out. Sometimes somebody who's not an attorney can help me do this. But there is a chunk of problems for which the analogy I often use is, you do not want me taking out your appendix because I don't know where it is. And in the same way, I mean, part of what you are becoming as attorneys is people with a particular kind of expertise that allows you to look at the facts of people's lives and understand the way they're institutionalized in the law and what can be done about them. And sometimes that's really simple, and I'm not an attorney, and I can do it. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to understand law in order to intervene in justice problems, and that's a situation where attorneys are absolutely essential, and that's why we have them.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about something that is, I guess, a bit provocative for a law school, since we are helping educate the attorneys of tomorrow, and that is the fact that there are people in the legal profession, some of whom have been in this building in the last year, Goodwin Liu, State Supreme Court Justice from California, James Sandman, who sat in your chair last year, who's the head of Legal Services Corporation, and they both told me that we have to admit that maybe non-attorneys could do some of the work. That could increase access to the civil justice system. How do you feel about that?
I think that's a great idea. And what I would love to see is a world where a couple of things happen. So it's clear there are situations where, you've all been trained as lawyers now, the law and the facts are so straightforward that it is not a complex process to figure out what to do and what the result should be. Those are the kinds of situations where people who are not attorneys can make really powerful impacts. But there's also a gigantic, so this part of the justice problems that not just poor people, but every group in society has these problems. 2/3 of adults have a justice problem in any given year. That's 2/3 of rich adults as well as 80% of poor adults, right? So all groups are experiencing this. There's some chunk of those that we really would like as a society to be treated in ways that make them turn out differently than they do. We want them to be lawfully resolved, and they're not being lawfully resolved. That is a latent market for legal services that I think the legal profession has been slow to figure out how to tap. And so part of the reason that it's hard to figure out how to tap it is this connection issue that we were talking about. So the timely, targeted, trustworthy intervention, because people are not sitting around thinking that they have legal problems they wish they had lawyer services for. So they have to understand, they have to make this transformation of their problem into something a lawyer could help them solve. That's one thing. But lawyers have also been really slow to make transparent, not law, because that's the expert part, but what it is that they're doing. Right? So when you come to me, we're going to meet 4 times, and I'm going to go with you to court twice, and I'm going to help you fill out the documents A and B, and they're for this purpose. And I realize I can't tell you exactly how much it's going to cost, but it's going to cost somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000. That makes contracting with an attorney a much more accessible, sensible, imaginable thing to people. You could take it even further. You could have a menu, which is what they do in some professional services firms in the UK. A will with these qualities is 500 pounds. A divorce with these qualities is 450 pounds, right? There's no reason lawyers can't develop those new business models, but they're kind of slow to do it. But there is a market there that they could tap.
Give me an example of non-attorneys handling matters that are related to civil justice. You have talked about something that was happening in New York, in Brooklyn, where they're using navigators. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Brooklyn Housing Courts hear 59,000 cases a year, and most of them are evictions for non-payment of rent. And at the time when I was starting my research in New York City, 95% of landlords had attorneys, and 8% of tenants did. So you have this massive sort of imbalance of arms in the situation, and there's no way that you can provide attorneys to all of the people who are there and would be eligible for them under the LSC rules or other kinds of rules we might make up. So the state of New York's court system, working with some nonprofits, said, what can we do to help all of these unrepresented tenants who are showing up in court? I know. We'll create this different kind of role. We'll call it a navigator. There were different flavors of navigators, but the most empowered navigator was a social worker who had some little bit of training in how to move that eviction case through court. And so there would be an intake when you were standing in line at the clerk's office to file your answer. Somebody would assess your eligibility for this program. If you were eligible, they would pull you out. And then that social worker would do 2 things. She or he would go with you to every court appearance that you had, call and make sure that you showed up, go with you to negotiate with the landlord's attorney about what the stipulation was going to be that you presented to the judge, go with you when you went in front of the judge, and those navigators were empowered to answer factual questions addressed to them by judicial staff. So they couldn't make arguments, they couldn't say anything about the law, but if the judge said, does Mr. Couchet have the receipt for the rent, the navigator could say, yes, here it is. Right? So that kind of very basic factual stuff. Then the other thing that the navigator did was all outside of court. So these were trained social workers. These are low-income clients, the same kind of clients that legal aid serves. And so these navigators would work with these clients outside of court to connect them to the benefits and services for which they were eligible, but not currently receiving, that would make it possible for them to reliably pay their rent. Because oftentimes the landlord is filing the eviction thing not because he wants you out of the apartment. He wants to make a living. He wants to get the rent. And so the navigators worked both sides of that. The tenant's presence in court in this adversarial process, but also the tenant's ability as a party to this lease or rental contract to fulfill their part of the deal. And in the first year of this program, when it was operating on a pilot scale, serving the same kinds of clients as legal aid lawyers and selecting them in the same way. So people who are especially vulnerable, who you can help. This program had a 100% success rate. Nobody got evicted. These folks cost half of what legal aid lawyers do. Now, does this mean that we don't need legal aid lawyers? Absolutely not. So the other thing that these folks were trained to do was if somebody comes in and you talk to them a little bit and you realize, wow, there's a complex issue here, or there's the possibility of a complex legal defense, we don't do those kinds of cases. And so then those cases would be referred to legal aid and a legal aid lawyer would pick them up. So there's clearly a lot of space to think about this body of cases that people who have a limited kind of training can help very effectively, and the body of cases that really need to be served by attorneys.
These programs tend to be pilot programs. How do we fund them? It's one thing to fund something for a short period of time as a pilot project, but it's something else to make it sustainable long-term.
Well, since we're feeling provocative,
Yeah.
so pilot projects are always funded by foundations or city grants or something, and those foundations and city grants want to move on to the next thing after 2 or 3 years. So sustainability is a huge issue. And there's not, I don't know if you've ever tried to fund something charitably, but there's not an infinite amount of charitable funding out there waiting to be used by different kinds of programs. And if you wanted to scale it, so it was what, $60,000 to do this for 158 cases, well, 59,000 cases run through the Brooklyn Housing Court. So how many millions of dollars would we need in charitable funding for this one program in one courthouse in one city? Not going to happen. And so if you want to think about a way to make these kinds of services sustainable, you have to open them up to broader client bases, some of whom can pay. And so the people who can pay subsidize the services received by the people who cannot pay. But in order to do that, you have to change the rules about the unauthorized practice of law.
On the non-attorney front, there's another, at least, I don't want to call it an experiment. That doesn't, I think, give it the credibility it deserves, but they're trying something, or have tried something different in Washington State. Tell us about that. It's where people are trained not to be attorneys, but to be something close to an attorney. They can handle some of the issues presented to them.
Yes, the Washington State Bar created something they gave the infelicitous name of the limited license legal technicians.
Inspiring confidence.
Yeah, I know. I call them junior varsity lawyers, which always makes them mad, but that's what they are. So they can play the sport, but not in the big leagues. So they have a limited license, they can practice only in a certain area, and they can do only certain things. So they cannot represent you, either in a negotiation or in court, but they can enact things on your behalf, they can file out documents, they can send letters, they can give you legal advice, you have client-attorney privilege with them. But again, only in their little area. And they're certified like lawyers. So you have to have a paralegal degree, you have to have 3 courses in a law school in the area in which you are certified to practice, and then you have to buy malpractice insurance, and then you have to take 3 bar exams. The ethics exam, see, they don't have diploma privilege. The ethics exam, the general legal exam, and then an exam in family law, and then you're certified. That program, if you think about that structure, has been slow to build, right? So the year when we started studying them, there were 23 of them. Now I think there are like 45 of them. With that kind of really tight regulation, it's hard to grow that very fast. It's also hard for consumers, going back to your dislike of this name. So wouldn't you like to buy a limited license legal technician? Like, so sort of thinking about how to, if you want to be commercial about it, brand, or if you want to be just practical about it, how to frame things so that what is being offered makes sense to the public as something you might possibly want to buy, I think is a challenge with these new models. Because we don't know the difference between lawyers and things that are like lawyers. Limited license legal technicians.
New technologies, can they fill the void? Can they help increase access to civil justice?
So there are lots and lots of people developing digital tools. They sit on your phone, they rest on the internet, that would allow you to either learn about or take some kind of action on a justice problem of some kind. And most of them are terrible. They require too much literacy for low-income populations to use. They're in English only. They have massive data requirements that you can't necessarily, pay for on your cell phone. But some of them are actually quite good. And the ones that are good have a number of common qualities. One is they just try to do one thing, and they do it in a very open way that is framing whatever they're trying to help you with the way an ordinary person understands it. And so my favorite of these tools is the thing called Just Fix. So it's in New York City, and Just Fix presents itself to you as, are there some things about your apartment that you would like your landlord to just fix? And so it's a very simple guided interview with like picture icons. Are there rats in the basement? Is there mold in the bathroom? Is water leaking here? So you answer that guided interview. Then it says, okay, you told me there were rats in the basement. Take your cell phone, go take a picture of the rat. You told me there was mold. Take your cell phone, go take a picture of the mold. Then you press done. And then the computer program says, okay, here's your letter. Dear landlord, I'm your tenant so-and-so. I live at your unit. Here's the unit. I'm writing to let you know that under New York City housing codes, you're in violation of blah, 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 and blah. Because the following conditions violations are happening in my apartment right now. And in case you're curious about how I know that, appendices A through K to this nice letter are the date stamped, time stamped, geolocation stamped photos documenting that these condition violations are in the property you own that I rent from you. I just want to let you know that under New York City law, you have this much time to fix this. And by the way, you have to give me 72 hours notice if you're going to enter my apartment to make these repairs. Have a nice day. Love, your tenant. And then the nonprofit that sets this program up mails that off as a certified letter to your landlord. Now that's a really good example of something that focuses on a problem that affects many, many, many low-income people living in low-income housing. It acts on it in a legal way. It writes a great complaint letter with great evidence. The challenge with these kinds of things is actually getting people to use them. So, how would you find it? So they have an outreach strategy that works with community organizations and tenants unions and so on, because those are the people who know people in these communities who have habitability issues. But they also have one of the issues with technology is generational. So it's not the case that young people are better at using technology than older people. Actually, young people are terrible at using technology. They're terrible at identifying credible versus not trustworthy information. But they're more likely to use these technologies than older folks are. So Just Fix has a grandparent outreach program. So they have interns that go to kids in schools and kids in community groups, and they're like, does grandma have the stuff wrong with her apartment? You can help her use this thing on her phone to write this letter to her landlord, and you can get that leak fixed. So people are very creative about this stuff. But it's again back to that timely, targeted, trustworthy sort of where you are when you have the problem from someone who you believe.
So I mentioned that a couple of folks we've talked to, attorneys, have said that they would like to see more of this. But I have to ask you, how has the legal profession responded? We had a bunch of people in this room who are either attorneys or soon to be attorneys, and they might listen to this and go, wow, that sounds like there won't be a need for me as I move forward.
Well, there's no way. Sometimes when I'm giving this talk to lawyers that are out in the world practicing and across the ranges of practice that people do, I have robot lawyer and the fear of robot lawyer, and robot lawyer is going to come and eat all of you, right? There is no way that computer technologies will be at a point to produce something that can do what you'll be able to do once you have your law degree. It will be a very long time, because it's not just about taking a bunch of facts and a bunch of rules and putting them together. It's about processing, like, imagine if you were a computer trying to listen to me, right? So the development of natural language processing on the front end of a really smart computer that can do this stuff, we'll get there for limited problems, but it'll be a very long time before we could come up with something that's like a person, because that's what a lawyer is. A lawyer is like a person. So I don't think you need to worry about being replaced. But I do think, a lot of this activity, the non-lawyer practice in the courts, the non-lawyer practice on your phone, is operating in areas where there is no commercial market for that service, right? There's not a raft of tenants lawyers running around the New York City housing courts providing legal services to poor people who are being evicted. So there's no competition in these spaces. But as those activities move to places where there are already established markets being served by lawyers, there will be battles about this. And you see this around LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer and Avo and other kinds of programs that are sort of moving into to establish market spaces.
You have referred to the access to civil justice situation in this country as a crisis. And I want to ask you whether or not you think that crisis has been overshadowed in some way by all of the discussion about the need for criminal justice reform. I mentioned at our noon event, we had a race in Wisconsin for governor where there was a lot of discussion about criminal justice reform. There will clearly be a lot of discussion about it in the 2020 presidential race. Does an important issue like the one we've been talking about sort of fall off the radar because of the other issue?
I mean, I think there's definitely a finite amount of public attention that can be brought to whatever issues we want to engage with. But I think that every bit of attention that the criminal justice system in this country gets, it needs and deserves. It's a horrible mess. It's inefficient. It makes mistakes all the time. It's biased in a whole range of ways that violate all the values that are the foundation of our lives. So we can't blame criminal justice for the lack of attention to civil justice, and we should absolutely be paying attention to that part of the system. But I think what happened with civil justice is it fell off the map after the 60s. So we had a war on poverty, and legal aid and legal services were an important part of the war on poverty, and then the political climate of the country changed, and we kind of called a truce with poverty. Go ahead, poverty, do what you want, we're not going to mess with you. And so access to justice, which was an important part of that movement, fell off the map. I think one of the things that I really am intrigued by with the criminal justice attention that I hope we can learn from on the civil side is 25 years ago, criminal justice reform was a thing for flighty lefties who wept tears over murderers and drug dealers, right? It was not a mainstream view. And now, groups and individuals across the political spectrum agree that the criminal justice system and mass incarceration are unsustainable and we have to do something about them. So it's not, just the Urban Institute and the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's the Koch brothers, all engaged together, and the Arnold Foundation, all engaged together in trying to solve this problem. And so one thing I hope that those of you who are engaged with access to civil justice will start to think about, how can we build that coalition for the civil side? How can we help, for example, employers understand that if their employees have to go hang out in court all day to try to deal with a really simple justice problem because they don't have some kind of assistance, because the court is underfunded and really inefficient, that's bad for the employer just as it's bad for the employee. So how can we start to craft these messages that make people realize that all of us have a stake in how this stuff goes down, and so we all have a stake in trying to fix it, which is what the criminal justice reform movement was successful in doing.
Final question, people in this room might be curious to know what you're doing with the Genius Grant.
I like to call it MAC money. So,
MacArthur Foundation money, all right, yeah.
So, as somebody who's worked in the access to civil justice space for 15 or 20 years, I think one of the mistakes we've made is trying to tell people that access to civil justice is something they should want. Now, why is that a bad thing to tell them? Because it's way too abstract. I often imagine going into elevators and saying to someone, would you like justice or injustice? And I'm sure they would say, oh, justice. And I would say, okay, well, what does justice mean? And every person I would ask would tell me a different concrete thing. Right? It's just too abstract to engage the public imagination. And so I think the next stage is to identify problems that are shared across many groups in the population so that many different kinds of people have, and set up demonstration projects that show that access to justice, so new kinds of services, rules changes, more efficient court processes, are a essential way of solving those problems. And when I think about problems that are ripe for that kind of demonstration project, I think of debt, because there are enormous levels of debt in this country, and much of the debt that we take on we think is good, right? So educational debt is an investment in your future. Mortgage debt is an investment in becoming someone who has a wealth and an asset. So, and that crisis is building and looming, and we're going to have to do something about it. So I think that's a ripe area. I think another ripe area is, as the population ages, there are going to be more and more people who are older who can't take care of all their own affairs. And once upon a time, we thought you were competent or you were incompetent. But now we have a much more sophisticated understanding. So someone who maybe can't manage their own finances can totally make their own medical decisions, right? And so there's a set of legal instruments that set up the ability for people to help such people, but also to protect the autonomy where they need the space of autonomy, so conservatorships and powers of attorney and limited powers of attorney and so on. And then at the other end of the age distribution, there are all kinds of kids whose parents can't take care of them for a whole range of reasons. They're in jail, they're deployed, they're part of the opioid epidemic, and there are often other adults in the communities where these children are who would be grateful to take them in. And it seems like you should just be able to go pick up your grandkid, take them home, and then when September rolls around, enroll them in school, right? But of course you can't. You have to have a whole set of legal instruments that let you get them vaccinated and attach to insurance and enroll them in school and pay hockey fees and all this kind of stuff. And so helping people deal with those things that are core parts of being people and caring for the people who we love, that we're all going to have to do more and more of. I think access to justice is a really important way of achieving those goals. And if we can show that, then we can raise the profile of the issue.
Professor Rebecca Sandifer, we appreciate your insights today. Thanks so much for spending the day at Eckstein Hall. We appreciate it. Thank you. Go ahead, sit over here.
You so much. When we're tackling issues that are as big as access to justice, it's so great to hear from somebody who just can help us think creatively and think about what's next. I know I feel ready now, like I'm ready to kind of get to work and think about what is next. And I hope a lot of you feel that same way. Thank you so much, Rebecca Sandifer, for being here with us. Now we turn our attention to our inductees. You all have distinguished yourselves in your commitment to some of the best ideals of the legal profession. Ours is a helping profession. I think everybody here knows that and feels that, and you all have been doing that as real helpers. Today's honorees have provided substantial pro bono work even while you've been steeped in coursework. Many of you have been doing internships at the same time. Lots of people are seeking paid employment opportunities, and yet somehow you've all made time to do at least 50 hours of pro bono work, and in some cases 120 hours or more of pro bono work. And this is work that is all not for academic credit or compensation. Work that needs to be supervised by a licensed attorney, is primarily legal in nature, and is of service to those with barriers to equal access to justice, or for an organization whose mission is to serve underserved individuals. Particularly for our guests to Eckstein Hall today, who might not be familiar with all of the pro bono work happening here at Marquette Law School, I'd like to tell you about some of the work that today's honorees have done just in the past year. At the weekly clinic held at the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Wisconsin, 4 students assisted Chapter 7 debtors and those considering filing for Chapter 7 relief. At the Guardianship Clinic, working with lawyers from Quarles and Brady, 6 students helped families with an adolescent on the cusp of adulthood living with a severe disability, requiring him or her to have help making medical decisions. At Legal Action of Wisconsin, 22 students worked with attorneys to prepare and file U-Visa applications for survivors of domestic violence crimes. At the Estate Planning Clinic, 30 students assisted in the creation of estate plans for more than 80 clients, consisting of a will and powers of attorney for health care and finances, all documents that will help avoid future guardianships and really help lend in the efforts to keeping the family home, often the only asset of clients we're working with, keep that home properly titled over multiple generations. At Legal Action again, at the Eviction Defense Project, 43 students participated. This project seeks to reduce housing instability for low-income Milwaukee families, especially those with children. Students there work alongside volunteer lawyers as they prepare clients for their court date by assisting with settlement negotiations, written answers, and providing limited scope representation when appropriate. In our domestic violence injunction hearings Lawyer for the Day project, 67 students worked with over 400 petitioners seeking domestic violence injunction orders. Research on this project was actually conducted this year, and it revealed that, not surprisingly, when people have a lawyer represent them in their injunction hearing, they're quite a bit more likely to win and to have their injunction granted. They're also much more likely to show up for the hearing. Our thanks to Quarles and Brady for its leadership of that project. At the Milwaukee Justice Center Family Law Forms Clinic, 76 students worked one-on-one with pro se litigants completing pre- or post-judgment family law forms. This involves helping litigants determine which form to complete, how to petition for a waiver of court fees and costs, how to serve the opposing party, where to file the papers, and if somebody needs more substantial legal advice, where to get that. To give you a sense of the need for the Milwaukee Justice Center Family Forums Clinic, 1,719 people received assistance there in just the first 3 months of 2019. It's a big operation. And then there is, as Dean Kearney always calls it, the flagship the Marquette Volunteer Legal Clinics, including our mobile legal clinic. This past year, 240 Marquette law students volunteered with these clinics alongside an extraordinary number of lawyers, volunteer lawyers. Together, they served nearly 5,000 clients, over 3/4 of whom are living at or below 115% of the federal poverty level. To give you a sense, that's $19,447 of annual income for a family of two, and a family of two is the average size we see in our clinics. And what I've just shared with you is just really a smattering of the kind of work that students are doing. Altogether, of the 177 students who are expected to graduate next month, 127 of them have done some pro bono work, and nearly half of them will graduate as members of the Pro Bono Honor Society, having been inducted here over the course of their 3 years. How remarkable. We are so impressed and so grateful, and hope you will continue the work after graduation. We will proceed now with Katie Mertz, our Director of Pro Bono and Public Service, reading names of each individual, whereupon you will come up and receive your certificate, recognizing your induction into the Pro Bono Society. Katie?
Cole Altman. Travis Bakoven. Katie Bakanovich. Michaela Beecher. Edgar Beltran. John Black. Matthew Borkovich. Charles Bowen. Kelsey Brown. Zachary Bukta. Jana Boudet. Antonio Cannavaro. Caitlin Carter. Amanda Collins. Jessica Delgado. Brayton Dupre. Jennifer Dombrowski. Megan Drury. Bijan Edmonds. Richard Esparza. Paulina Fernandez. Sarah Flaherty. Maggie Frawley. Anna Gage. Grace Gall. Danielle Gorsuch. Luis Gutierrez. Shelby Hahn. Jade Hall. Tyler Yolkman. Renee Jones. Kylie Kaltenberg. Nicholas Kirkman. Daniel Kinderman. Micah Kordick. Kelly Krause. Gerald Lally. Joseph Long. Austin Lauer. Jordan Lyzak. Gilbert Malice. Robert Manick. Professor Lisa Mazie. Kelsey McCarthy. Daniel McCracken. Megan McTeague. Ian Mickelson. Bridget Murphy. Saloni Patel. Asia Patterson. Charles Polk. Sergio Quinones. Rohit Rangarajan. Olivia Robinson. Brian Rolfe. Jacob Rosema. Jason Sauser. Luke Schutzel. Chad Shamali. Alexandria Smith. Bridget Smith. Tavis Smith. Natalie Soberisky. Margaret Spring. Haley Steponik. Mackenzie Subart. Alicia Thomas. Alyssa Thompson. Catherine Thompson. Theodore Wagner. Brenna Wilt. Maura Woods. Chu Zong. Jennifer Zima.
Let's give them a round of applause. On the one hand, I feel like congratulations are in order, but at the same time, I really feel like it's a thank you that needs to be said. So I was saying thank you to everyone, because I really do. Thank you for deciding to do this. There's no reason you have to other than realizing the need is there, feeling like you can contribute. You can, you have. Thank you. Thank you also again, Rebecca Sandifer. Thank you to Josh Gimbel and the Posner Foundation. I always, of course, he's not even here, but I would say thank you to Dean Kearney because he is so supportive of our Office of Public Service and makes room, makes space makes sure that this can continue to happen. So thank you, Dean Kearney, even though you're not here. Thanks, of course, to the law firms and the lawyers who partner with us. As I mentioned, there are hundreds of lawyers who volunteer their time, and I look to our 3Ls, soon to graduate, to fill the shoes of many of those lawyers in the coming year as well. So remember that we're here for you. Our Office of Public Service remains here for you as alums, as you think about where can I start giving in my new capacity after graduation. I'll be here, Katie Mertz will be here. Reach out to us for sure. We admire the work that you've done so far, as I say, stick with it. And at this point, I just hope everyone will join us right outside this room in the Zilber Forum for a reception. Thanks, everybody.